A special two-part firing line on the occasion of the publication of Ronald Reagan's autobiography, An American Life. This program is a production of SECA. Funding for Firing Line is made possible by a major grant from the John M. OLIN Foundation, Incorporated. Additional support is provided by the MOBIL Corporation, L. John Polite, Jr., the Friends of Firing Line, and by the financial support of viewers like you.
We proceed to examine the memoirs of Ronald Reagan, An American Life, published by Simon & Schuster. We have been talking primarily about his economic programs, and I want to touch on a few other episodes of his presidency. But before that, Mr. President, you were talking about gerrymandering and the distorting effect that it has on the composition of the House. You say you think that the census should be taken more frequently?
No, what I think it should be done is that there should be a bipartisan commission appointed every 10 years to redraw the districts, to reflect what were the changes in population and so forth. Instead, when you leave it to the legislatures, it is a conflict of interest, because these are people now that are looking at their own district and so forth, and the result has been the gerrymandering is they will shape a district. Granted, they will funnel as many Republicans as they can, but into as few districts as possible. And then they're assured of the majority. And they've done this. And when I asked for a map of the districts of the Los Angeles area, I got a package that looked like a nest of snakes. They just, every twist and turn that you can find in order to maintain that majority in the legislature.
How come the Supreme Court permits them to get away with that? In Baker versus Carr, the one-man, one-vote decision, you would think that that would preclude that kind of Mickey Mouse.
Well, I guess just no one's ever brought a charge or anything on this. But, for example, the California congressman that came home with a plan for the last redistricting, and last one that we'd had, and turned it over to the legislature, and this is what they carried forward with. He jovially and publicly stated that I can't remember exactly how he put it, but he was joking about the fact. Well, I know what he said, that he had taken up modern art.
And it does look like a Rorschach test of various kinds, doesn't it?
Yes. Well, the last election, congressional election, 98% of the incumbents were returned to office.
Yeah, I calculated a few years ago that the incumbency rate in the House of Representatives exceeds that in the House of Lords. You can use that in your next book. Now, let's touch a little bit on foreign policy, but en route to the Soviet Union, I want to ask you this. Why did you insist on going to Bitburg?
Well, I was invited, and it was a state visit. I was invited by the head of government of Germany, and a program was provided of the things that they were going to have me do while I was there. And one of them was visit this cemetery, which is right near, in Bitburg, is right near one of the NATO bases in which Americans and Germans, particularly air forces, are lined up together. And then, yes, there was some protest coming. But then I received a message from a member of the German government who was an opponent of the Chancellor and had ambitions of his own, inviting me to visit another place. Well, I called the chancellor and told him about this, and he told me some things, in addition to other things that I was receiving. He told me, see, there was supposed to be some stormtroopers, the ones who were always in charge of the concentration camps, some stormtroopers buried there. But he gave me the number of several stormtroopers who were buried there in prisoners' uniforms because they'd been executed for being kind to the prisoners. Well, I didn't see where it was going to do any harm then, in view of that, to visit this. And in addition, I had begun to get letters from people who had been inmates in these concentration camps. One, a man who wrote me that back at that time he was a 16-year-old boy. And they were writing to tell me of the times when stormtroopers had actually saved them, rescued them from being sent to the ovens for execution and so forth. So all I was to do was to go there and...
But a point you make in your book is that you also came to the personal conclusion, and one with which the only time in the entire book your wife disagreed, that that 40 years having gone by, it was time to confirm the good behavior of Germans without, and not hold them responsible.
That's right.
For the sins of their parents, in some cases grandparents. Yes. And that was an important motive, was it, in your assistance?
Well, yes, because, for example, we made a visit to one of the great camps. And saw all the horrors still preserved, and photos and everything of it. And then found out that in all these years, they had been bringing every year school children to see this camp and see the horrors. And the message then to the school children was, this must never happen again. Well, you have to recognize there's been some change. But I also felt that if I, as the head of state, had invited the head of another state, well, as I did many times, and proposed a program for him, I wouldn't take it very kindly if he started...
If he retailored it.
Yeah, that he wouldn't do some of the things I had suggested doing.
Well, let's move on to the Soviet Union. You have said that you made it absolutely plain to the Soviet leadership that you were not going to let them assume such dominance as to make a first strike ever enticing. And to the extent that we had to beef up our inventory of weapons, we would do so. Now, suddenly, and after you left office, the Soviet Union, in effect, collapsed. Did they collapse because they were prepared to forswear their dogmas, or did they relapse because they had been led to a point that they couldn't sustain themselves and continue their imperialism?
Well, part of this you have to give credit to Mikhail Gorbachev. When he took office, he discovered, to his surprise and sorrow, that he had inherited an economic basket case. And much of it was due to the manner in which they'd been spending on armaments. So he was one who started out that he wanted to talk the reduction of arms.
Did he have any alternative?
What?
Did he have any alternative?
Not that I know of. But also, he, and to this day, still has the opposition of much of the Politburo because they don't want to lose their perquisites. Now, for example, he took one away from them. The bureaucrats had stores that were for them only. They didn't have to stand in line for hours, and then when they got in, there was no choice of meat. You could only buy one kind of meat. They had stores where they could walk in and out like we do and have the choice of a half a dozen different kinds of meat. Well, he did away with those. And he has thought of other things. He had one plan that he was talking about once that didn't happen, and that was about the automobiles. Because less than one family in 7 in the Soviet Union owns an automobile. And if you try to buy one, it takes 10 years for delivery. But all of the bureaucrats are provided with cars, and most of them with cars and drivers. And if he had gone forward with this other plan, you can imagine what would happen when all of a sudden they're grounded and they don't have those automobiles.
Well, but what alternatives did he have? It's now acknowledged that they spent up to 25% of their GNP on the military. Now, you can get an awful lot of cars and drivers by simply shrinking that minimally. But something else happened, didn't it, that forced Gorbachev's hand? I know that you want to give him credit, but he's also somebody who tried to win the war in Afghanistan, didn't he, before he came around?
Well, except that he had early on said that he would withdraw the forces from there, and he did that. He took a period of time to do it, but he did it slowly.
Well, he came to power in 1985 and announced that he would pull out in 1988. So there were 3 years there during which 700,000 Afghans were killed.
Well, he had to make some allowance that he didn't have the full power to do some things without some support of the government. And remember, the government of the Soviet Union was the Communist Party.
Yes.
And he wasn't elected by the people. He was chosen and appointed. Now, he had to find and feel his way as to things that he could get done, and is still doing it. But I can say two things about him that are different from any other Russian leader. One, he is the first Russian leader that has never stood before the great Politburo, the Soviet Congress, the deputies in Congress, and pledged support of the Marxian demand that communism must become a one-world communist party. That, in other words, every nation, the expansionism, every leader had to pledge and did pledge that he would do that, continue that expansionism. He didn't. That was one of the...
Now, how conspicuous was his failure to do so?
Well, it had to be conspicuous to all those people
who were waiting for sort of a liturgical mandate.
It never happened.
Yeah.
And...
I remember you called me once after you got back from Reykjavik, and you said that you were conversing with Gorbachev, and he pointed to his wife and said, you know, she's an atheist, giving you a fleeting impression that he meant as distinguished from me, who am not one.
Well, that's how I had to take it.
Yeah.
Because this was back when you could not join the Communist Party without pledging that you were an atheist, that you did not believe in God. Now, whether he did or did not, but his mother had him baptized.
Yes.
And now, Nancy and I in Leningrad on this last trip, on Sunday, we went to church, and we were only two of over 1,000 Russians that were in that church, shoulder to shoulder, for a 2-hour service.
Well, I guess the question I'm asking is, did Gorbachev ever communicate to you any infidelity to Marxist dogma?
No, he always claimed that he believed in communism, but he would then add, but has been badly managed. And he would always add that, and so that he was making changes, he was correcting the management of the program.
Right.
There was a...
And you felt that these were simply required lines that he had to enunciate. And did you reach a personal conclusion about his fidelity to communism?
Well, right now, it's very evident. But it began to show. There was a chemistry that was beginning there between us, and things that were taking place. And now, being there and seeing, he is talking openly of free enterprise. And he is talking openly of opening up the land of the Soviet Union to private ownership. Now, there was a time when he tentatively talked, but not the way it is now, when he said that he was thinking in terms of some areas that could be opened to private investment there. In other words, bring in capitalism in these areas. he then began hinting at something about maybe allowing some of the workers on the collective farms to lease land and raise products and sell the products in the marketplace.
Yeah.
Well, you know, they did. The workers on the collective farms were given acreage around their homes in which they could farm and sell to their own marketplace there. You know that that land was only 3% of the agricultural land of the Soviet Union. But from that 3%, the Soviet Union got 40% of its meat.
Well, you make that point very, very vividly in your memoirs, but my own impression is that you don't give yourself quite the credit that you're entitled to in being the agent that pushed the Soviet Union into a confrontation with reality from which it could not reverse itself. For instance, when you insisted on deploying the theater nuclear weapons in Europe, originally at the request of the Germans, but they sort of became ambivalent about it. But in 1982 and 83, you did it, notwithstanding the entrenched opposition of the left. Now, didn't this send a special signal to the Soviet Union, which might very easily have dictated their conduct during 1989?
Well, again, it was my philosophy of peace through strength rather than mutual assured destruction. That the Soviets had an intermediate range nuclear weapon, missile, and it was targeted on virtually all the major cities of Europe, Western Europe. And it was the Western Europe that asked us for something as a deterrent to the use of that weapon. And that's when we said yes. Well, first, we challenged the Soviet Union to a 0-0 concept. They'd do away with theirs, we wouldn't put ours in. But our allies had requested this. They would not. They walked out of the meeting on 0-0. So we started sending cruise missiles and another form of weapon to match the intermediates. All of a sudden, the Soviets came back to the bargaining table. And a couple of years had gone by. They came back, and believe it or not, they used our term. They said, let's talk 0-0. Well, we got the treaty, and here again, another first for Gorbachev. He is the first leader of the Soviet Union who has ever signed a treaty that resulted in them having to destroy weapons they already had. Any other treaties having to do with weapons always dealt with, well, how many more will we build and so forth. But there was the first time, and that treaty destroying their weapons as we destroyed ours. So that plus the other makes you think, well, what I changed my dealing with him was that, you know, I had a Russian proverb that I used a great deal, to where he'd clap his hands over his ears, doviai no proviai, trust but verify. But what I had changed my philosophy was, don't trust because of their words, trust because of their deeds.
Right. Well, their deeds on many fronts are wonderfully reassuring, but we've still got a country there with 12,000 nuclear warheads, and they're still spending an enormous amount of money, and the only natural mode of what it is that they're subsidizing is aggressive. These aren't defensive weapons. Is this simply a matter of the military bureaucracy asserting its hand, or is there some contingency there that you think we should worry about?
Well, no, it might be that, but remember also, we are continuing to increase armaments, but we are also in negotiations with them and have been for quite some time on those other weapons, and including also negotiating on conventional weapons. For example, the battlefield nuclear weapons both sides have And they've made some noise about that, the Soviets. And we've said, well, the answer to that's very plain. The only way we can equalize your conventional weapons superiority is by maintaining our battlefield artillery-type nuclear missiles. But if you want to start trimming down on the tanks and the artillery and so forth, and we are in negotiations on that.
Well, let me ask you this. Given the desperate nature of their economic circumstances, which you've described, why is it that they don't move faster? They are terribly hard up, and yet they're spending scarce resources, and continue to do so, on mobile SS-22s, 3s, and 24s. What is it that is preventing them from agreeing to a disarmament convention quickly enough to save this hard, scarce money?
Well, I imagine that's just the controversy of his own side. And you see, they were pledged to expansionism. And this thing of when we talk about communist infiltration into organizations, that was just a part of that expansionism they were supposed to be doing. So there is a limit to what he can get by with. But I was amazed on this last trip at the freedom with which not only he but others are talking about free enterprise and about he has now proposed a plan that the people of the Soviet Union be allowed to vote on whether they want private ownership of the land or not. And so, as I say, I know there's got to be limits as to how far he can go and how many things he can do. But now he's being joined by others. There are other leaders in there, and they may disagree with him on some things, but they're talking about these same changes. And the people certainly are.
Do you think that there is any danger if we have a dissolving Soviet Union in one of the republics actually getting hold and using in a menacing way some of the atomic hardware?
Well, that's why and that's the argument I have used with him, that we all know how to make nuclear missiles, nuclear weapons, and that's why we should continue with SDI, our Strategic Defense Initiative.
Which is my next question. Is he theoretically, or conceivably, might there be USSR-American cooperation in developing SDI?
Well, I told him that if we've got to say that we're still in the development stage. Have we got such a thing? I have told him that I would advocate making that information open to the world.
Well, you always have.
Yes, in return for all of us destroying our nuclear weapons. But I said the reason then for having it is, and I used the example of World War I. I said, all the nations after World War I met and outlawed poison gas, but we all kept our gas masks. Now, I said, who can say that down the way someday there won't be another Hitler? There won't be another madman that could use the knowledge of how to make weapons and blackmail the earth.
Well, we've got Iraq right now.
So I said to him, but if you put it on a term of eliminating the weapons, then anyone that eliminates them, I would be in favor of giving them access to the knowledge about the Strategic Defense Initiative.
Well, so much for the cosmological questions addressed in your book, but it's a book that also gives the reader wonderfully rewarding taste of you, your experience, your background, your family, and one that struck me several times on reading it is the frequency of your references to God, to Providence. There's a section there in which your father-in-law, Dr. Davis, gets sick. It's obviously terminal, and you deeply regret that in his young days he became agnostic, and then you write down in your journal that, in fact, he called for a chaplain toward the end. And then you cite the difficulties that you had in not being able to attend services on Sundays because of security. To what extent do you continue to believe that our country is providentially blessed and guided?
Bill, you can call this mysticism, if you will. I have always had a feeling, a belief, that this continent was placed here between the two great oceans to be found by people from wherever in the world who had an extra ounce of desire for freedom and an extra ounce of courage in order to pick up and leave friends and countrymen and so forth and come to this country. We are, this nation today is an example of the brotherhood of man. I've looked out at an audience of thousands of people and said, if I could go through here and ask every person, what is their heritage? Where does their background go? You'd find virtually every nation in the world is represented there. I would have to answer three: Irish, English, and Scotch. Other people, other mixes as we've intermarried and so forth. But our whole nation, yes, you and I, we're native born here. But if we have to go, what is our heritage? What is our ancestry? We find that it's everything. There's a man wrote me a letter just before I left office, and I have to share it with you. This letter just briefly said,
10 seconds.
Let me just say, he said, you can go to live in France, but you can't become a Frenchman. You can go to live in Italy, you can't become an Italian. And he cited all of Japan, Turkey, all these. But he said anyone from any corner of the earth can come to America and become an American.
Thank you, Mr. President.